We actually launched one of the first GPT-like interfaces across AT&T within my organization, AT&T Assistant. It allows any employee to ask questions of our knowledge base and get really great relevant information and answers back. We answer 1 million calls every single day in our contact centers. So imagine trying to do something like that at scale. For the companies that are trying to wait until they have perfect data, you'll never have perfect data. So, it's better to just start. And some of our teams are actually using our AI to actually cleanse the data that's going into the AI. It's a really kind of an interesting thing where they're using Copilot or they're using other technologies to go look at the inputs there and be able to say, hey, can you give me a summary of what these things are? Can you show me any areas where the data does not make sense or that things are not aligning? And let's review and look at those things so that we're actively honing in on where some of the erroneous data is without having to go through every single record of that data. And then taking that, stewarding it, and putting it back into the model.
Welcome to the new automation mindset where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. Today, I'm very excited to have with me John Miller. He's the VP of Consumer and Retail Solutions at AT&T, and before that, 10 years also at GM, where he was the VP of Digital Product Management. So today, we're actually going to talk about AI agents. And of course, lots of smaller companies are leaning in, going quick with AI agents, and probably what most of you would expect that a large enterprise like AT&T is taking a long time to adopt this stuff. And then I met John and learned that the reality is actually quite different. So I'm super excited to hear from John and learn what AT&T is already doing today with LLMs and AI agents. And I think there's going to be a lot for all of you here to learn, especially the larger companies. And I think, everyone really. So let's kick this off. So John, what I learned, again, a little surprisingly, is that AT&T is very much cutting edge when it comes to the world of AI agents. Give us a little bit of an overview. Like, what are you doing today? How does that fit into your business area also, like the consumer and retail solutions?
Sure, Markus. So today we're doing a lot of really interesting things on AI and agentic AI. We actually launched one of the first GPT-like interfaces across AT&T within my organization. It's called AT&T Assistant. And what it does is it allows any employee to ask questions of our knowledge base and get really great relevant information and answers back. It's funny, when we initially implemented our knowledge management tool, a customer would walk in and they would say, what are the colors of the iPhone? And our knowledge management would say, the iPhone can do 16 million colors on the screen, but that doesn't really help sell an iPhone, and that doesn't really answer the question. So we actually used OpenAI. We loaded our knowledge management in, and we started getting questions like, hey, what are the colors of the iPhone? It says, oh, the iPhone 16 comes in blue, black, white, green. And, then it says, would you like me to open up an article that shows you those colors that you can kind of turn around and show that to a customer? So that was kind of the first foray that we had in really doing something with a large language model. We use our own. That's one of the industry standards that we've done in terms of being able to go fast, being able to be secure, and truly have something that is customized to AT&T. But we also use other technologies like Google and our call center AI. We do a lot of call shed around that. So when customers call into to AT&T, we can actually answer their call through AI. We understand what they want. We can hopefully sometimes solve those problems that they have without having to take them to a human. And then when we can't, we actually move them over. So a lot of times customers will ask questions like, hey, what was my last bill? Or why was my bill more last month than this month? Or, hey, my router is having problems. How do I reset it? And all of those things, all of those intents can be handled with an AI through Google's tools. We have a lot of work on billing, on summarization of customers. One of the things that we're finding is that we have petabytes of customer information, and we really want to be able to understand a customer and be able to use all of that information to help serve them better. So now we are, when someone calls in, somebody walks into a store, we can take all of that data and say, what are the challenges that that customer's had for the last 45 days to give a good summary so the customer doesn't have to repeat themselves. So those are just a couple of the examples of AI and some of the agents that we have.
And why do you think you guys are so cutting edge? Is it because you're kind of at a hotspot for Gen AI? Is it support? I think support. You mentioned knowledge management. I think that's kind of where the LLMs do really well, right? Is that probably the reason?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of reasons why we really leaned into AI, into agents, as well as into kind of the large language models. Number one is that when you have the scale of AT&T, it's really hard to be able to get through all of that data, to be able to churn through all of those transactions without some kind of machine learning and AI processing. A great example is that we answer 1 million calls every single day in our contact centers. So imagine trying to do something like that at scale. And when we started looking at the transactional processing of all the different APIs that we were using and everything we were doing, we're talking about trillions of transactions a year. And so to be able to handle that and to be able to scale, we started looking at, what are the technologies that are out there that will help us to really serve our customers better, but also really be able to start using all of that amazing data that we've been gathering, for the last 20 some years.
So it seems like, it works even better at scale, or maybe it's the only solution at some point at that big scale that you guys have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we started having a couple of ahas. Like 5 years ago, as we started looking at things like doing training for and coaching for our contact center advisors, the humans that are actually taking the calls, what we found is that we were only doing about 10 or 15% of the calls where we could give coaching and say, hey, here's how you can get better. Here's how you can serve customers better. Here are some of the words that you should be using to really help customers understand. With AI and with our transcription services, now we can actually do that to 100% of our calls. We can start looking at every single one of those calls and saying, hey, here's the intents that the customer had. Here's something that you could do so that that next call is better. And here is something where other people can benefit from the learnings that you had on this call. Pulling that into our knowledge management systems.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Listen, when we spoke first time, one thing still sticks in my mind. And, you obviously made your career in solutioning for business processes with IT solutions, whatever businesses you worked at. I started my career in business process redesign. And I keep telling people that, look, and this was in the 90s. So in 30 years, I believe there hasn't been anything more disruptive than these AI agents when it comes to business processes. I'm convinced of that. Now, we talked about this, and then you took it a step further. You said, Markus, disruptive, yes, but the way I look at it, it flips everything around. Can you explain to everyone listening here what you mean exactly? Like in terms of IT solutioning, why does this flip everything around?
Sure. I think that when we start thinking about traditional application development and user experience and kind of that human control interface, we often think about, step A goes to step B, goes to step C, that gets to outcome D. And that's really kind of how a lot of our applications are wired. But the reality is that most customers don't start at step A, right? They may have already done research. when they talk to somebody at AT&T, they may already be on step B or C, or maybe they want to start at step C before they go to step A. And so traditionally, each one of those steps had like a workflow. It had this has to be completed first before this next step happens. With agents, we see that completely changing. We started seeing things where things will happen asynchronously, where maybe we'll start with a credit check because a customer wants to know how much they can afford, or maybe we'll start with what the services are. Do they go internationally? Where are they going? What are they doing? And so maybe it's a needs-based assessment. But now with agents, we can start firing off different things at different times and then consolidate them at the end. And so that's really something that's really, really interesting to us, because now we can really let our customers write their own story and then be able to meet them, where they want to be met. The other cool thing is that we're starting to rethink about, instead of having workflows that says, go do these steps serially, now we're starting to think about those workflows as you have to do 8 things or 10 things. And then how many of those things have you done? And then what are the next things that you have to go do? And so if a customer or an employee is more comfortable doing step 3 before step 5, and then step 1 after that, they can do that. And they can allow the customer to really kind of tailor the experience that they want. And that all happens because these agents now can work on behalf of that customer or on behalf of that employee doing those things. The other thing that we're starting to see now is that we have to really refine what it means to have that customer interaction. So one of the things that I love about these agents is now we can start automating some of those lower value items so that we can actually spend more time with our customers on the high value things. So, instead of saying, okay, I have to do these 5 things and, customer, wait over here while I fight with the system to go do it. Now we can just fire these agents off to do those things. And then we can start having the discussion with the customer about, well, what are your needs? How do we help you? How do we match our products and services with what you want while the system is going and doing some of those lower value things, and really drive more of that human to human interaction?
Well, it feels to me like the agents are much closer. They're resembling reality. In like if a really good rep, services rep out there would do the work with manually, right? The agents resemble that a lot better than the kind of step by step, almost like program of how the IT solutions used to be built. I mean, I think, everyone, you mentioned the example of the checklists and you got to do those things. That sounds a lot more like you would do if you do something at home, like you wouldn't draw a flow chart, right? So it seems like it's probably a better, it helps you to abstract better and it helps you to, I guess, meet the customer like much closer to how they think also.
That's true. And it also helps with, as things go wrong in a workflow, now there's instant feedback within that, because the agent is not just saying, I'm going to go off and do this and not come back to you. When there's a bump in the road, it can come back and ask very specific questions to go fix and finish off. So a lot of these things we see are almost self-healing, because in the past it would be like, oh, this item broke, so now we have to send it to another call queue, or we have to have somebody step in and do this manual transaction. Well, now the agents can come back and say, hey, I need a little bit more input. Human that's in front of me, give me some direction, and then I'll continue to go forward on these different tasks. And so we're seeing not just less training, because now these are interactions and they're starting to talk like a human in terms of, hey, this didn't work, can you help me here? But we're also seeing that this is really more how, if you were interacting with another person, they would come back, ask you a question, go do some work, come back and ask another question, go do some work. So we're seeing that people really like that kind of interaction with the agents.
Tell me a little bit about the process of solutioning. I think, the old world, the traditional world, I mean, somewhat is understood. It's a workflow, or maybe it's on a flow chart. You start doing wireframes, then you write the business logic. It's kind of like programming in a way, right? You build that out. Maybe upfront you do some interviews, maybe you run some process mining of some sort, something like that. Uh, when you design these AI agents, what is the creative process now? Because I think it's quite different, right? Because you're looking for existing knowledge items, you're collecting them, you're probably looking at existing transactions and how can you get them into the agent. Like, how would you describe to someone who hasn't done this before, like, how the creative solutioning process is different now? And maybe also, like, what do people need to learn now that they maybe haven't learned before?
Things have changed quite a bit. Like there's some things that I think remain the same, and there's some things that have changed quite a bit. So one thing that we love to do is something that we call conference room pilots, where instead of building out kind of that user interface and sort of like we like to put people in a room and say, look, take a piece of paper, walk through how this process should work. And really, instead of building a user interface, we just say, take a piece of paper and say, you want to create a quote, or you want to build a proposal, like a request for proposal, and then walk through how you would do that in a manual perspective. Now, that's kind of how we're starting to think about these flows. But then the other thing that we have to do, and this is the new part of this equation, is that we want to shove as much data and information into the AI about the processes, about what happens if something goes wrong, about how we've solved the problems in the past, problems that we've had, and potential solutions, or where we don't have solutions. And so we put as much data and information into our large language model as possible. The next thing that we do is we work on prompt engineering, right? Because that's one of the biggest parts where I think that people don't always get that right. Instead of like they don't spend enough time thinking about, well, how do I give the AI context about who it's supposed to personify and what are the things it's supposed to do, and being able to say, look, you are a tenured salesperson who is doing this process of creating a quote. You're thinking about margin and revenue, but you're also wanting to make sure that you are diligently focused on the customer and meeting their needs as a customer. And then, with all of those prompts, we start then using that as the context behind what the agent is supposed to do. And then we say, so now create a quote that does this. And so that whole prompt engineering is really important because it tells the AI what is the personality it should have. The other thing that we like doing is we start like doing questions and answers to that and say, hey, now that we have the prompt, let's start actually exercising it, and let's put it into some situations where it can learn from those situations and then give it feedback that says, no, that's not right. Maybe this prompt should be tweaked a little bit because you're not an expert on the quoting process. You're an expert on our products. And these are the products that you understand and want to be able to use within the conversation that you're having with a customer. And so, by doing those tweaks and by training the AI, we've gotten some really amazing results. The other thing is that what we're finding is we can't entirely take the human out of the equation here, because there are some things like hallucinations. There's times that the AI just doesn't get it right. And having somebody that's able to look at that and be able to say, nope, try again. Or, this is good, but we can do better. Or let's come back and say, that doesn't work for me. Go and do this other thing. Those are very important as well. So, we don't see AI as replacing humans. We see them as augmenting, making them so that they can spend more time on the things that matter, as well as be able to review those things that may have taken them, 15 or 20 minutes in the past, that now they can spend 30 seconds looking at it and say, yep, that's a great answer, and then moving forward.
And it seems to me the way you describe the process, iteration is important. So my, look, my personal experience with the prompt engineering, just for like, I don't know, preparing emails or, doing any things, is always that the first shot isn't always the right one. And then you modify the prompt a little bit and you give it feedback, just like what you would do with an employee who just started in the company. Um, you might be familiar with this concept of vibe programming, where they use AI for traditional programming, but in it, I think the whole idea is really that you iterate it on. You start with somewhat of a rough prototype, and then you refine it and refine it. And it seems like that probably is a lot more true now with the AI agents than with the original traditional solutions, where people just try to get it right and then just implement it. Is that fair? Like
That,
iteration? Yeah.
yeah, that's very fair. And one of the things we do is we kind of have two different model types that we are working with at AT&T. We have models that we want to have as a learning model where every input is evaluated and then learned so that the AI gets smarter over time. But we also have models that says, look, there are going to be policies, there's going to be things that we want to make sure that the AI is consistent on. And we don't necessarily want just every interaction to be a learning experience so that it is changing its answers over time. And so we'll put those into a mode where we say, we will do training, we will help you learn, but then at a certain point we say, okay, this is as good as it's going to get, and then don't continue to learn, because we don't want to have something where if it's making policy changes and it says, look, I've seen the last 25 things, I've done the policy this way, so the 26th one I'm going to go and automatically make that same decision. We want them to be really, really focused on making sure that it's not necessarily making bad decisions based off of future input.
Mhm. I have a question around user adoption of this technology. I think you made this comment last time, about your experience at GM, and that was around these, voice controls in the car, right? AI powered voice controls, and I think the one thing that you said was, people are not very patient with this stuff. Like, they either it works perfectly or they just don't use it anymore. I mean, are you guys still seeing this also with the Gen AI in other use cases that people are not that patient? They expect it to be perfect.
Yeah, definitely. So during my time at GM, um, it was amazing, and it was really cool to see how kind of the voice assistants in the vehicles have changed over time. One of the things that GM did a great job of is they always looked at customer feedback in terms of how well they were doing, and how many times that customers would continue to use things, like when you'd say, hey, voice command, turn on the radio, or turn the air conditioning on, or turn the windshield wipers on. And what they found was two things that were really interesting. Number one, customers really want to be heard. And when they feel like they're not being heard, they get kind of upset. And you can imagine that for our own personal things, where if you've tried something a couple of times and you say, take me to point A, and then it takes you to point B, or it says, I don't understand what you're saying, and it says, can you say that again, right? And you keep saying it over and over and over. Like the first time you repeat yourself, you're probably at about 70% upset. The second time you repeat yourself, you're now at about 110% upset. And so what we saw is that customers that would get upset like that, one, they would never treat another human being like they treated the virtual assistant. They would never like start out just yelling at them. But we would hear these recordings in the cars where people would be like, just take me home, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, I wish it would just take them home, right? So they would get so upset at that. But then, what we'd find is that they would never use the voice assistant again, because they were like, hey, if it didn't hear me that time, why would I ever use it? And so trying to get those customers back was really difficult. Now, fast forward to from General Motors to AT&T, we see some of that same thing. I mean, picture yourself as you pick up the phone and call like a big contact center. Is the first thing that you say like operator, take me to a rep, and you don't try to use the voice commands there. That's a real thing, and probably about 20 to 30% of our customers automatically do that. And so one of the things that we also try to do is we try to win customers over with, hey, we'll put you in front of a human being, but it may take us 5 minutes to be able to get you there. So can we at least try on some of these things while you're waiting? Maybe we can solve it, but if not, hey, at least we tried, right? And so we are working on doing that, as well as the other thing that AI has done a really great job of is being able to reschedule and be able to say, look, you won't lose your place in queue, but can I call you back when your time is up? Because your time's valuable too, right? So sometimes the AI doesn't necessarily have to solve your problem. It can just make sure that you can talk to that real human being in a timely fashion. So those are some of the things that are there. But like listening to some of those calls with those customers, and they're just so frustrated because the virtual assistant did not understand what they were saying. It's something that we always keep in the back of our minds in terms of how do we make it better over time.
It's so funny because it also stuck in my mind. And then just last week, I was at a conference and there was a keynote speaker, Zach Cass is his name. He was at OpenAI at some point, but then he became calls himself a futurist. But he gave a keynote kind of making the same points that you made. He brought some examples, like, for example, the elevator and how people were afraid of the elevator. They just didn't want to go there. And at the end, putting an operator into the elevator was the one thing that got people to do it. The Waymo cars, the self-driving cars, even things like nuclear power, because there's this, and he also made that point how there's just this human empathy that you have with another person that you don't have with a machine. But I do think that, with the Gen AI, these machines are getting a lot more human-like than they used to. So who knows? Maybe we all learn and get her and give the machines a chance. Also, they seem to be doing a good job. When you iterate a little bit with it, it's quite fantastic what you get as results.
Well, and one of the things, it was funny, Google started doing this, and we're seeing this happening a lot in the industry now, where AI will actually sound like a person. Google had a great example where he would actually put ums and ahs and pauses in there. And at first we were like, oh, that's crazy. Why would you do that? Like average handle time, like make the point as quickly as you can and go on to the next customer. Let's make sure that we're valuing our customers' times and putting pauses and things like that and thoughts and changing the words. And like, is that really what we should be doing? And the more calls we listened to where the AI had a little bit of an affectation and sounded a little bit more human and used similar words to the customer that was talking to them, we found that those calls had higher call satisfaction. They met the needs of the customers. Now, the one thing that we always wanted to do is let them know, hey, you're talking to a computer, right? So this is not a human being. But the more we can kind of mimic and make it sound like a human being while still being an AI, the better satisfaction we got from those calls. So I think there is something to be said for a little bit of empathy, a little bit of emotion within the verbiage that's happening, and being able to understand when a customer is mad, maybe you do talk a little bit softer and you use different words to help them calm down a little bit so that you can get to solving their problems. And we're seeing a lot of AI now where that is happening, and that's, I think, going to be very healthy for the industry.
Cool. All right. Well, a change of subject, because I'm just curious. I had a conversation with another CIO, also a large company, old school company in the automotive industry, actually. and this CIO's challenge was they still have quite a bit of like mainframe technology, legacy technology. I'm sure at AT&T some of that is also around, right? And so he was asking me, look, Markus, okay, so I got this mainframe. The traditional mindset would be, okay, I got to do like an ERP implementation now. And he said, like, look, I've done this 3 times, been painful every single time. And I really would like to avoid that if possible. Now, there's these AI agents around. What can I do? Because I'm not familiar. I'm not like a front runner like you guys are. They're not using LLMs and so on. Like, what can someone do if you're captured with a bit of legacy technology and so on, and you want to move forward and you say, like, how can that new technologies, these AI agents, how can that help? How do you think about this?
We have something very similar. We have a fair amount of mainframes. We have a lot of legacy, and a lot of times it's not cost effective to just try to replace it day one. One of the things that we're doing is what I call the Python model of replacing these systems, which is we just like a Python, we wrap that system, right? We get our arms around that system, and then we start squeezing a little bit at a time so that we can eventually kill the system. And so one of the things we look at is really the time to value equation to say, what are some of those higher value things that we can start, using and replacing without necessarily replacing everything. And that's where we start putting like our agentic AI in there. That's where we start looking at, how do we change kind of the user interface so that we can still get value out of the legacy system, but they don't have to go back to a green screen. They don't have to look at the stuff that may be very difficult to understand or require a lot of training or have security issues that you have to go fix. And instead, they start hitting an agent. The agent goes and does those things on their behalf. And then as we start building more of those agents, pretty soon people are not going to that mainframe at all. You can start then having those agents get repointed to your new system. But from an end user perspective, all they know is that they're making a request to the agent and the agent is going and figuring it out. They don't care what that backend system is anymore. And so by kind of wrapping the system together and then starting to squeeze a little bit at a time to take those pieces of functionality off and then moving that functionality over to a newer system, we can do that very easily. It doesn't require any more training. Our users are very comfortable with it because, again, they're just asking an agent to go do something and it just works. The other thing that allows us to do is as we start thinking about, scaling, we can A/B test things. We can actually have something where the agent is sending some of the transactions to the legacy, some of the things to the new. And then as we start migrating over, then the agent starts making that decision and then starting to scale those systems over time. And that helps as well in terms of, again, no impact to the end users, and we get to the same place that we wanted to go, but it's not as abrupt or jarring to our end users.
So I think that from what I'm hearing here is that with the new AI agents, the companies that do have some of this tech debt, the legacy systems, actually have more flexibility to deal with it. They might not have to, jump to the ERP system that just gives them another workflow, step-by-step process, which kind of with the agents might not even be necessary anymore. But you can keep the mainframe. You can, when you wrap it, like the Python is, I guess you service enable it, right? And then these things become functions that the AI agents then can leverage. So and then you can, as you want to migrate it, you do that behind the scenes. Or frankly, I mean, if you don't want to, you could still run the old stuff.
Right. No, that's very fair. And that's that kind of time value equation of, look, is it better to leave it on the old stuff, but just not have to swivel chair anymore? Or, because of the security and because of keeping the stuff up long term, you may want to move it. But again, what we're looking at AT&T is that you don't have to retire everything immediately. And to your point, some of those things can last for a very long time because they're already paid for, right? And they already are pretty stable, and the technology is very trusted. And it's just driving a better user experience and having a new user interface, and again, not having to kind of recreate everything that you built before.
I think that's super helpful. So the last topic that I wanted to just deep dive a little bit into it, you talked about the petabytes of data that you guys have at AT&T on customers and so on. And obviously the data matters to these AI agents. I imagine like an AI agent that has access to not such good quality data is probably likely a bad agent. Or, some companies might have that 5 petabyte of data not in one place, but, spread across many, many different places, and maybe even hard to access. Maybe it's there, but it's really hard to use it the right one and the right time. How do you guys think about data at AT&T in that new world of the AI agents? I guess did you do some foundational work to get ready for the AI agents, or maybe also what would you recommend to colleagues out there if they want to go ahead with AI agents and so on? What do they need to do from a data perspective to be ready and get the most out of it?
Sure. So at AT&T, I'm very lucky because we have an amazing chief data analytics office that really focuses on how do we know where all the data is. They have a lot of tools that we can use to actually start making the data better. But one of the things that we started seeing as we started putting more and more data into these models was, yeah, to your point, the model and the AI is only as good as the data that you're putting in there. And I will say that the initial models that we started putting in, at times we would kind of scratch our heads and go, why is it answering this way? And then we'd go back to the source data and look, and we're like, oh, the source data is wrong, or oh, this was not mapped correctly. Now, one of the things that we are seeing though is that the data doesn't have to be perfect to still be very valuable and allow you to start looking at things, because the beautiful thing is that when you have petabytes of data, you can start looking at data trends and start going in the right direction, even if not everything is not perfect. So for the companies that are trying to wait until they have perfect data, you'll never have perfect data. So it's better to just start and get out there. Again, one of the things that we're also doing is we also want to make sure that we have human intervention too, to make sure that as we are doing these models, that we're getting human feedback that says, hey, this is working, or hey, I didn't get what I expected, right? So thumbs up, thumbs down on the answers, so that we can go back and start looking at some of this data after the fact too, to say, hey, were there things that we should have done differently? Should we cleanse some of these things? And then one of the coolest things that I've seen is that some of our teams are actually using our AI to actually cleanse the data that's going into the AI. It's a really kind of an interesting thing where they're using Copilot or they're using other technologies to go look at the inputs there and be able to say, hey, can you give me a summary of what these things are? Can you show me any areas where the data does not make sense, or that things are not aligning? And let's review and look at those things so that we're actively honing in on where some of the erroneous data is, without having to go through every single record of that data, and then taking that, stewarding it, and then putting it back into the model. So we have seen AI helping us fix AI, but the biggest thing is that start putting that data in, start using it, start getting some humans to actually look at that to see, are you getting the expected results back, and then continue to move forward. And I would say start off small and just kind of grow over time. And that's kind of the thing that we've done a really good job on, in terms of, we didn't try to boil the ocean. We didn't try to load every single thing into our large language model. The other thing that our CDO is doing a great job of is that they're looking at best of breed technologies. They're not saying that you have to use only the the official large language model of AT&T, it's going to be great for the things that are internal and the things that we want to have as very safe for our customer data and things that we want to have proprietary information in. There's also a lot of great models that are out there, especially free models around doing summarization, transcription, being able to, understand sentiment analysis without necessarily having to be an expert at our business. So we are using kind of the best of both worlds to be able to do that. And then we're putting the right data into the right LLM to be able to then, make the best of both worlds.
I can completely agree with your your one comment of using AI to maybe like pre-process the data in certain way. I've seen that with knowledge items like tickets. Let's say that multiple tickets together address a knowledge solution. And if you use AI to summarize these tickets into knowledge nuggets before and then feed those into the LLM, actually you get much better results than if you just put all tickets in, because you lose some information. So that one, tell me a little bit about, because there's data and then there's dark data, maybe like unstructured data, maybe data that is there but somehow invisible, like maybe in written documents that never made it to the data warehouse, or maybe IoT logs of how the user uses certain telco devices out there. Are you guys looking into that more dark data and how that can enhance the LLMs and the Gen AI?
Yeah, we definitely are. We're actually seeing better results out of that dark data or that unstructured data than all of the structured data that we have in terms of being able to get to kind of new ideas, some new product offerings that we can have. We're seeing a lot of great use of that data because, again, one of the things that AI is really good at is you don't have to have everything into a specific canonical that says, here's exactly what this thing is. It can kind of classify things itself and then put those things in the right areas for its understanding. And what we're seeing is that a lot of this disparate data that we have, it's making ties that make sense, that we didn't even think about in terms of, because a lot of times it's like we have so much data and there's just so many different things that a human could not actually map those things together, because when you're talking about petabytes of data, that's impossible for any one person to go think through. So a lot of that unstructured data, we're actually using AI and having a lot of ahas ourselves in terms of things like, where are our cell towers and how are we helping serve customers? Where should we have the new cell towers and what should we be doing? Like it is something where, it's taking a lot of structured and unstructured data, combining that together, and then giving us insights that we normally would not have had. So, we definitely see value in that. We don't see as much hallucination in that because, again, it's not something where it's trying to add A to B to get to C. It's actually looking at these other types of relationships, and so oftentimes it is better at kind of figuring out relationships than we as humans are, because sometimes we are sequential thinkers where it's kind of doing a random access of tying these things together.
Mhm. It's fascinating. Fascinating. Look, listen, this has been super, super interesting. I'm curious, is there, we talked data, we talked about, what we do with our legacy systems. We talked a little bit about this creative process of solutioning. Is there anything, like, just based on your experience so far, that we haven't talked about that we should be talking about? Something else for your colleagues to think about when they start on this journey that you guys are already on?
I think that as people are getting started in this, the three pieces of advice I would love to give people. Number one, just get started. This is truly going to be a transformational thing. And just like you can't really imagine what it was like before the internet, I was telling my kids, like, hey, just Google it. And, back when I was a kid, Google was the Encyclopedia Britannica, right? And things have changed so much and we have access to so much more information now. Well, that is going to transform 1,000-fold with AI and these agentic things. So, getting started now, you can't go too early just to start figuring it out and start using it. The other thing is that those things are going to start scaling incredibly. So some of the things that a lot of companies are looking at, you don't have to be a developer now to create agents. You know, my kids are 12 years old, and they're already starting to play with some of this technology that's there. As we start looking at some of the things that Microsoft and Google and some of the bigger players are doing, they want to really commoditize AI for every employee and say, why can't you use and create your own agent to go do these things instead of having to wait for somebody in technology to go create it for you? And then when you create a great agent, maybe we just populate that up and move that into something that other people can start using. It's not too early to start. And it doesn't matter what your role is to be able to start using that and start experiencing it and starting to drive better experiences because you've done some level of automation. The second one is think about the experiences. I think that we don't spend enough time thinking about the experiences we're trying to enable. And AI is going to give us a completely new way of creating those experiences. And so, the task A goes to task B, goes to task C. That's all going to go away. And it's going to be really about what is the experience that you're enabling. And then the agents are going to help you get there. And so if you start with the experience and start with the end in mind, you can start seeing unique and new ways that the agents will be able to help you in ways that probably 2 years ago, were unheard of. So start with the experience and then layer on top of that the things that AI can do for you. And then the third one, I think like a year ago, it was funny. A lot of these companies that were talking about agents were really talking about replacing human beings. They were like, oh, if I can do this for you, then you can replace an expensive human being with a very cheap agent. So pay us a bunch of money for these agents. We've seen that model transform dramatically over the last year. And instead of most companies saying, look, get rid of your humans, just use agents. Now, I think that they're going the same direction that AT&T is going, which is, look, humans are important. People buy from other people, and so having the humans play a role in building those relationships with our customers, create customers for life. So don't get rid of them, but instead have them focused on those higher value things and let the agents and automation handle those other things. And let those agents and automation give them more time to spend with your customers. And by doing that, your customers are going to have higher value in what you're producing for them. And so I think that that's probably the biggest area where I think most people get it wrong, especially starting out. They think, oh, well, I can either like employees think, oh, the AI is going to replace me, and so I don't want to do it. Or some businesses think, oh, well, all I need is AIs. I don't need people. But I don't think that that's where this technology is really going. I think it's going into a place where customers feel valued because they have that human to human interaction, and they can see that you are working very efficiently because you have other agents that are helping you deliver that experience for that customer. And so that's where I think the future is, and that's where I think that we will really see an explosion of use of this technology.
That's amazing. That's really good advice. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, I think the time to start is now. I think the learning is really important. I think getting comfortable with the iterations, I think, is really also important because you need time for that. Also, if you start too late, you don't have time to iterate. The one thing also that I always tell people, I don't know if you've guys seen that. These LLMs are getting better and better and better and better. I mean, we had some situations where, like a certain contract, like a very difficult document. Just the LLM couldn't understand it properly. And then, Gemini went from 2.0 to 2.5 and boom, overnight, it just got it. And so something that might have not worked yesterday actually might work in 2 weeks. Like, try it again. And there is a lot of that. I mean, things are just moving so fast. But it's super exciting to see AT&T make use of that. Super exciting to. It seems like you're getting a whole new sandbox of to play with here for these solutions, and it's no matter what company, small or large or whatever, can really get closer to the customers. I think there's a lot to be gained.
Yeah, and Markus, to what you said about the models are changing over time and they're getting better and smarter at answering. The other thing that we're seeing is that they're getting cheaper over time too. The other piece of advice I would give is, even if you have something that requires an expensive model now, in 2 weeks you may see a cheaper model being able to do it faster, and much cheaper than you had before. The other thing is that you don't need to have the most current models to do a lot of the work that you're doing. A lot of the things around summarizations and historical things, or searches and things like that. You can use some of the free models, and they work amazing. And so, don't be afraid to mix models in terms of what works for you as a company.
Perfect. Hey, John, thank you so much for spending the time with all of us here, with the entire audience, and giving us a glimpse for what this can look like and how we can all get value from generative AI. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Markus. This was great.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.